Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Nurses, supermarket workers, cleaners, teachers, childcare workers, truck drivers and aged care workers, amongst others, have helped Australia get through the pandemic. Why is the Prime Minister rewarding their sacrifice and hard work by cutting their take-home pay?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What the Leader of the Opposition just said is completely untrue, Mr. Speaker. It's not true. This is a response from the Labor Party which is not surprising but disappointing as usual, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is predictable, Treasurer. It is predictable. Mr. Speaker, in the peak of this crisis, we pulled together employers and employee representatives from around the country. We got them together in good faith, Mr. Speaker, some 150 hours, bringing together in discussions around a whole range of issues, Mr. Speaker, and we said very clearly as a government that having gone through that process and listened, that the government would eventually bring to this place a full package of job-creating and job-keeping changes, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that Australia could come out of and emerge through this COVID-19 recession, Mr. Speaker. That process was not one where we sought parties to sign off on the end of a period of discussions, but we listened to them and then we brought forward the changes that the government believes are necessary, Mr. Speaker, to keep jobs and to create jobs, Mr. Speaker. It is true that the comeback of the Australian economy has begun, Mr. Speaker, but the recovery process has a long way to go. And for that recovery process to continue, and whatever sector or industry Australians are from, and the Leader of the Opposition has mentioned many of them, their jobs do depend on continuing changes being made to ensure that we can keep people in jobs and that we get more people back into jobs, Mr. Speaker. We are seeking to do that in a way which allows those employees and their employers to be able to sit together and make agreements, Mr. Speaker, that leaves them in a better position as an organisation, as an enterprise which creates and supports jobs, Mr. Speaker. Our changes back the wisdom of people in their workplaces. Our changes, Mr. Speaker, back the necessity to get Australians back into work. Mr. Speaker, I said of the Leader of the Opposition some time ago, if you don't know how Australia went into the COVID-19 recession, then he has no clue on how to come out of it. And what he has betrayed today is that sentiment again, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Labor Party does not understand the nature of the economic challenges faced by Australia. And it is true, Mr. Speaker. It is absolutely true, Mr. Speaker, that our recovery has begun, but it has a long way to go. And the government has a broad platform of measures as part of our COVID-19 recovery plan that has already seen almost 80% of work coming back, Mr. Speaker, and that's how we'll continue.
Concluded. I didn't interrupt the answer to warn several people, including the members for Gorton, Ballarat, Cooper, Kingston Smith and many others. I'm not going to keep warning people. I'm just going to remind members, but if they interject, I will act as I did yesterday. We need to do better than we've been doing in terms of interjections, and I'll have no hesitation. I remind them that Standing Order 94A does not require a warning. I've just been doing that to be extra tolerant, but it's not resulting in the level of behaviour that we need. So if members interject, don't be surprised if you're ejected. I call the member for Chisholm.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister outline to the House how the Morrison government's economic recovery plan is driving our comeback from the COVID-19 recession, including by helping create and secure more jobs?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. I thank her for, once again, for her leadership in her community, and particularly for her great leadership of the Chinese Australian community in her electorate. that was so critical, Mr Speaker, particularly in the early phases of the pandemic and the way that they practiced the necessary health precautions that ensured that Australia did not face in the same scale as realised elsewhere in the world the devastating impacts of COVID-19, as was experienced in other countries. Mr Speaker, in the early phases of the pandemic, one of the key objectives that we had was not just obviously to cushion the blow and to get on top of our health response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The goal was to build confidence again, to restore confidence that had been shattered by the COVID-19 pandemic that hit this country. And Mr Speaker, that goal of confidence amongst Australians, amongst consumers, amongst businesses, is the critical ingredient for Australia's comeback from the COVID-19 recovery. And today, following the earlier surveys that were released this week, both with the ANZ survey and consumer confidence jumping to a 2020-year high, Mr Speaker, business confidence in the NAB survey jumping to an over more than 2-year high, today we hear that the Westpac consumer sentiment confidence has risen to the highest level in a decade, Mr Speaker. That says that Australians have responded to the supports, Mr Speaker, that have been put in place, both at a federal, most significantly, but also as a state level, Mr Speaker, to ensure that they could look forward into the future, into 2021, with great confidence. And Bill Evans, Mr Speaker, has put the rise in confidence down, amongst many things, to rapid, proactive responses from authorities, critical to containing the economic damage. There is a clear understanding from Australians that the government has worked with other governments around the country, cooperatively, proactively, Mr Speaker, to support Australians through the worst crisis they have seen in economic terms since the Great Depression. And that work will continue as we continue to roll out the recovery plan from the COVID-19 recession that was set out by the Treasurer. And that includes so many issues, from skills to infrastructure to lower taxes to important changes in our workplaces, cutting red tape so businesses can employ. Mr Speaker, all of this designed so they can look forward to 2021, and as we gear out of a series of supports into a new layer of supports, Mr Speaker, that will see Australia through. We have a plan to see Australia through. It is seeing Australia through, and today's confidence figures show, Mr Speaker, that Australians have the confidence to back that plan.
Has concluded. The Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. It's true that businesses around Australia have had an extremely difficult year, but doesn't he understand that working families have too? So why do they deserve a cut in their take-home pay? Why is it that businesses are encouraged to come back while working families are held back?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, again, what the Labor Party is saying is not true. Because, Mr Speaker, 80%, Mr Speaker, of the jobs that have been either lost or hours reduced to zero have come back. They are the jobs of working Australians, Mr Speaker, that were lost. 700,000 jobs would have been lost, Mr Speaker, were it not for the proactive work of the plans that this government put in place to see Australians through. And, Mr Speaker, we want to see that continue. We want to see another 200,000 jobs come back just to get us back to where we started. We want to see hundreds of thousands more of those jobs come back on top of that. And, Mr Speaker, you don't get there unless you deal with the things that act as a barrier to Australians coming back into work. Mr Speaker, I believe Australians are better off in jobs. The Labor Party wants to stand in the way of Australians getting jobs. If you're for workers, Mr Speaker, you should be for jobs. This government is for jobs. Before the pandemic, Mr Speaker, 1.5 million Australians were able to find their way back into work through their efforts and as a result of the supportive policies for our economy that saw that occur, Mr Speaker. And we are doing the same thing now as we come through the worst recession that this country has seen since the Great Depression of the 1930s. Mr Speaker, the conditions that Australians are facing now The businesses that employ them, which are 8 out of 10 Australians, are unknown to the Labor Party. They somehow think, Mr Speaker,
Members on both sides.
think that somehow, Mr Speaker, these jobs will create themselves. Mr Speaker, the Labor Party does not know how to get Australia out of this great challenge. But I can assure Australians, Mr Speaker, that we understand. And that is empowering Australians through their skills development. It is about empowering Australian business and workers through lower taxes, Mr Speaker. It's about empowering Australians to get more hours, Mr Speaker, so they can earn more, Mr Speaker. We want to see Australians earn more, and you can only earn more if you're in a job, Mr Speaker. The Labor Party may not understand, Mr Speaker, that if the business doesn't exist, no one has a job, Mr Speaker. They might not understand that, Mr Speaker, but our championing of an economy that is driven by those who create jobs, Mr Speaker, we know is the way to get Australians into jobs. Mr Speaker, these changes are modest, I admit. These changes, Mr Speaker, are pragmatic. These changes are practical. Those opposite would like to return to conflict politics, Mr Speaker. What we seek to do is see workers and their employers work together under constructive.
Just to remind members of my earlier statement, and I now issue a general warning. If you want to know what happens from here, it's either less interjections or you can get out yesterday's Hansard from about 2:15 onwards. The member for Mallee has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. Will the Deputy Prime Minister inform the House how the Morrison-McCormack government's comeback plan from the COVID-19 recession is delivering critical infrastructure projects across regional Australia?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, everybody will be in furious agreement with what I have to say, and I know that the member for Mallee knows all too well.
Just say to the Deputy Prime Minister, when I'm trying to get better behaviour in the chamber, provocation doesn't help.
Well, if they don't agree with me, Mr Speaker, they will agree with local Wedderburn cocky. A bloke by the name of Des Lanyon, who said prior to connection of the South West Loddon pipeline, I needed to cart water for 20 out of the past 50 years. Could you just imagine having to cart water for 20 of the past half-century? He also said, in those years, I spent between 40 and 50 hours a week carting water just to meet our livestock and household needs. Now, this farmer, he is so pleased that we are investing and developing water infrastructure. He belongs to the member for Mallee's electorate. He lives near Wedderburn. Some people might know that that's where the Hand of Faith gold nugget came from, near Wedderburn. And we know, and certainly everybody should know, that water is worth its weight in gold. That's why we're building dams. That's why we're getting on with the job of making sure that the National Water Infrastructure Development Fund has the resources it needs, $3.5 billion of money, to be able to be spent on developing water infrastructure for farmers like Des Lanyon, for farmers like in the member for Bass's electorate, Cameron Moore from Jetsonville. He said of the Scottsdale Dam, it means we have been able to expand the current vegetable production to onions, potatoes, carrots, weeds and beetroot. But back to Mallee, great Victorian electorate. We've completed 2 of those water infrastructure projects, securing supply of water for agriculture. Now, the South West Loddon Rural Water Supply Project, a $90 million investment, ensuring supply for 219,000 hectares. The delivery of this project in constructing the pipeline has connected more than 380 customers across communities such as Wedderburn, Inglewood and Bridgewater. The project has delivered jobs in the region. As the Prime Minister would agree, that's what it's all about as well. It's about jobs. It's about jobs for construction, jobs for the future. 40 jobs during that building of it, around 134 jobs created in farming, in agricultural output for that fantastic area of rural Victoria. Now, the project was completed in May of this year, and the benefits are already flowing to the customers. Now, in Mildura, the Sunraysia modernisation project number 2 is also delivering 90 jobs. Member for Mallee knows this well. The project delivering water supply to about 2,000 hectares of land around Merbeen and Red Cliffs, and this expansion has allowed for an increase in ag production in citrus and premium grape yields, a significant export for the region. And these projects are but two of the projects we're getting on, we're delivering. We're investing in water infrastructure, we're investing in the future, we're investing in agriculture. We want it to get to $100 billion by 2030. I know the Minister for Agriculture is right behind this, as we are all and as we should be.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is addressed to the Prime Minister. The government says the economy is recovering so well the JobKeeper and JobSeeker are being cut, but now says the economy is going so badly that businesses need to cut the take-home pay of working families to stay afloat. Which is it, Prime Minister? Because it can't be both.
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, the only person who has a bet each way on everything is the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Speaker. He's the only each way in this House, Mr Speaker, and that's well known. Mr Speaker, our policies, Mr Speaker, are designed to put Australians into work, and that's what they're achieving. Mr Speaker, it is regrettable that the Labor Party once again, as they did before the last election, Mr Speaker, wants to engage in the politics of division and seek to set one group of people against another. The claims made by the Leader of the Opposition in his question are false, Mr Speaker. They're designed to try and incite division in this country. But we're used to this from the Labor Party, Mr Speaker. At the last election, they tried to set one group of taxpayers against another, Mr Speaker, one set of business against another. It is always the way of the Labor Party to seek to hold some down, Mr Speaker, in order to advance others. That's not our view, Mr Speaker. It has never been our view, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Labor Party does not know what's going on in the economy, and his question betrays that point, Mr Speaker. What is occurring in our economy is that we need to continue to implement our plans to transition our economy as we see the recovery increase into the future. We have provided record income support, which those opposite on one hand say they need to taper, and then on the next hand say they don't. An each-way position from the Leader of the Opposition, which he is becoming very well known for, Mr Speaker, all around the country. Whether it's on economics or national security policy, Mr Speaker, this is the Leader of the Opposition which will have an each-way bet on every single issue. What we will do, Mr Speaker, is get people back into jobs in successful businesses that can pay them better and better in the years ahead, Mr Speaker, by having a strong economy. Those opposite may want to engage in the politics of negativity. My government is focused on the economics of recovery, and a key part of that economic recovery plan is not just skills, it's not just affordable energy for heavy industries, Mr Speaker, and getting the gas that is needed to fire up our manufacturing sector. Mr Speaker, it's not just about building the infrastructure that is necessary to drive our economy forward, or the digital transformation plans, the 30,000 additional education places next year in universities, the biggest rollout, Mr Speaker, of communications infrastructure on this government's watch, Mr Speaker, the biggest ever, Mr Speaker. That's what we've achieved. And, Mr Speaker, making practical changes for how workers and employers get together and make their way through this crisis is critical to our recovery plan. The Labor Party, Mr Speaker, are stuck in the past on these issues. They don't understand cooperation in the workplace. All they understand is conflict. Throughout this crisis, it's been conflict plus from the opposition.
Concluded. The member for Indi has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. Minister, small and regional news media publishers are vital to rural Australia. They face unique challenges different to those of the large media corporates. Will the Minister commit to amending its News Media Bargaining Code legislation so that its planned 12-month review specifically considers and reports on the impacts of the code on small and regional publishers?
The Minister for Communications.
Well, I thank the member for Indi for her question, and the Morrison government certainly shares her view about the importance of regional media. That's why we committed $55 million under the Public Interest News Gathering program, $18 million for regional newspapers, including in her electorate the Wangaratta Chronicle, the Mansfield Courier, the Euroa Gazette, the Ovens and Murray Advertiser, the Myrtleford Times, the Alpine Observer and the Benalla Ensign. amongst others, are regional media outlets which have received support from this government under the wide range of policy tools we've introduced this year to support regional media through the challenges of the pandemic and the recession that it has brought. But of course, Mr Speaker, we are doing more. Our plan to support the comeback of the media sector and the broader economy from the COVID recession, of course, includes the mandatory code, with legislation introduced in the Parliament just today by the Treasurer. And this is a powerful policy tool to support diverse, independent Australian media voices, including in regional Australia. It builds on thorough policy work over 3 years, initiated by the then Treasurer, now Prime Minister, with the ACCC Digital Platforms Inquiry. We've consulted very extensively with stakeholders, both the news media businesses, large and small, around Australia, and the digital platforms. And of course, what the mandatory code requires, backed by the force of law, is for Google and Facebook to engage in commercial negotiation with media businesses, Australian news media businesses, on how they should be remunerated for content that they generate and they pay for, because quality journalism costs money, and if that content is accessed by Australians through the digital platforms, if it attracts eyeballs to those platforms, that those platforms very successfully monetise, very, very profitable businesses, then it's appropriate that they should pay remuneration for that. And that is what the mandatory code is designed to achieve. And of course, we have very consciously thought about the role of regional news media businesses. So there is a power for news media businesses to collectively bargain with Google and Facebook, and we expect that may well be taken up by smaller news media businesses, including those in regional Australia. And of course, there's also a provision for Google and Facebook to make default offers, which again we think may well produce outcomes for smaller news media businesses and regional news media businesses. So the Morrison government shares the members' commitment to regional media. We're supporting the comeback of regional media as part of the comeback of our economy from the COVID-19 recession. We're for quality public interest journalism about issues and events of importance to Australia. The News Media Code will support that.
The member for Herbert.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer explain to the House how the Morrison government's effective economic leadership is helping to create a stronger and more secure economy as we embark on our comeback from the COVID-19 recession?
The Treasurer.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Herbert for serving in the Australian Defence Force, Mr Speaker, and being a champion on mental health issues, on veterans issues, on infrastructure, Mr Speaker, and more than 70,000 taxpayers in the member for Herbert's electorate are getting a tax cut as a result of policies supported by this side of the House, Mr Speaker, and around 4,000 businesses in Herbert have been benefiting from the JobKeeper program. Now, the member for Herbert, like other members on this side of the House, understand that the Australian economy has faced its biggest hit since the Great Depression. It saw a reduction in quarterly growth in June of 7%. This compared to a fall of around 12% in New Zealand, 14% in France and around 20% in the United Kingdom. But, Mr Speaker, the economic comeback is on, Mr Speaker. The economic comeback is on, Mr Speaker. Take the interjection from the member for Chifley. We welcome his comeback too, Mr Speaker. But it is not as impressive as the Australian economy's comeback, Mr Speaker, because what we have seen is consumer sentiment is up by 4.1% this month. Up by 4.1% this month, where we've seen 4 consecutive months of consumer sentiment rising. And Bill Evans, the Westpac's chief economist, saying that consumer sentiment has fully recovered from the COVID-19 recession. And yesterday we saw business confidence up, Mr Speaker, and we've seen strong jobs growth. We have seen 80% of the 1.3 million Australians who either lost their jobs or their working hours reduced to zero at the start of the pandemic. We have seen them back at work, Mr Speaker. And 178,000 jobs were created last month, and the effective unemployment rate has reduced from 14.9% down to 7.4%. And in the month of October, we have seen 2 million fewer Australian workers on JobKeeper compared to the month of September. And that may be cafes in Sturt, Mr Speaker, crane drivers in Lindsay, Mr Speaker, cake makers in Reid. We have seen right across the country businesses graduating from JobKeeper and workers no longer needing that income support. And we also saw in the September quarter 3.3% GDP growth here in Australia, which meant year on year the Australian economy is performing better than France, than Germany, than the United Kingdom, than Canada, than Japan and than New Zealand, Mr Speaker. So the economic comeback is on. Australians are getting back to work. It's still a tough road ahead, but the efforts and the policies of the Morrison government are making a difference for the better.
The member for Rankin.
Thank you, Speaker. My question to the Treasurer refers to his answer just now. If the economy is going so well, why are you cutting people's pay?
The Treasurer has the call.
Mr Speaker, we are helping Australians get back into work.
Treasurer will pause for a second. The member for Solomon will leave under Standing Order 94A. The Treasurer has the call.
Mr Speaker, the member for Rankin's assertion is simply not true. What we have seen across the country, is that jobs are coming back in the face of the most significant economic shock since the Great Depression. And the policy supported by those on this side of the House, are not only creating jobs, but they are strengthening the Australian economy for the recovery ahead. And on the budget night on October 6th, we announced tax cuts for more than 11.5 million Australians. We announced a loss carry-back measure to give businesses working capital so that they can continue to keep their workers employed. We put in place immediate expensing provisions for businesses with a turnover of up to $5 billion to support investment across the country. We've also put in place a JobMaker hiring credit to support around 450,000 jobs. We've invested more money in infrastructure, transport infrastructure, water infrastructure, telecommunications infrastructure. We're backing apprentices, Mr Speaker, 100,000 new apprentices across the economy by providing an up to 50% wage subsidy. So it might be an inconvenient truth for the member for Rankin, but the reality across the Australian economy is that it is coming back. That is, the recovery is underway. So the member for Rankin may be entitled to his own opinions, but he's not entitled to his own facts.
Resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
On direct relevance, the Treasurer should either defend the cut to take-home pay or drop the policy.
That was not a point of order, I say to the Manager of Opposition Business. The Treasurer has concluded his answer. The member for Fairfax has the call. Let's keep moving. The member
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question today goes to the Minister for Health. Will the Minister please update the House on Australia's health response to the COVID-19 pandemic, including the encouraging developments in the search for a vaccine, and how critically important this is to our country's economic comeback?
The Minister for Health.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Fairfax, who's been a great champion for the Bloom Hill Cancer Centre and the care that they provide to people who are most in need. On the subject of those most in need, shortly before coming to question time, I was given the very heartening news by the National Incident Centre that there are 0 Australians with COVID-19 on ventilation. There are 0 Australians with COVID-19 in ICU, and there have again been 0 cases of community transmission right across Australia today. And that achievement comes against the background of a world with over 68 million cases, with over 1.55 million lives agonisingly lost, and in the last week, the 2 highest days with regards to daily case numbers and with daily lives lost. And so the extent and scope of COVID-19 is greater than ever. And we know that in Australia, over that same period, there was 1 case in 7 days of community transmission and 69 cases within the hotel quarantine scheme. And what that says is these are cases coming from overseas. And so we will not be truly safe as a nation until the world is safe and safely vaccinated. Our vaccination program is a critical part of that, and we have taken the advice of the scientific experts and will continue to take their advice. SciTag, or the Scientific Technical Advisory Group, led by Professor Murphy, has been fundamental, and their advice has been critical in our selection of vaccines and will be critical and fundamental going forwards. Significantly, there are over 212 vaccines
Minister
being
will just
developed
pause
around
for a
the
second.
world.
The member for Bruce will leave under. I can recognise his voice even though I can't see him behind the lectern. But, the minister has the call.
There are over 48 vaccines in human clinical trials and over 10 vaccines that are currently in phase 3 clinical trials. And our scientific committee has led us to the position where 3 of our vaccines are within that group of 10, which is a wonderful result. The Pfizer vaccine has already had approval within the United Kingdom on an emergency basis. What we've seen today is the AstraZeneca vaccine has now had Lancet publication of fundamentally important results. That's great news for Australia. The AstraZeneca vaccine is being produced as we sit here in Parliament in Melbourne by CSL. That domestic production capacity is helping Australians. It may even allow us to expand our production capacity, to accelerate that process of what we're doing. And these things are critical for saving lives and protecting lives and giving us a strong 2021 and a safe 2021.
The member for Gorton.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. Wages growth has been stagnant for the 8 long years of this Liberal government. Won't cutting the take-home pay of working families just make things worse?
The Treasurer.
Well, Mr Speaker, we reject the false assertion from those opposite, Mr Speaker. But what we do say is that the policies on this side of the House are assisting with the comeback of the Australian economy. And when it comes to wages growth, we've seen it at 0.7%.
Treasurer will pause. The member for Corangamite will leave under Standing Order 94A. The Treasurer. The Treasurer has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, we have seen wages growth at 0.7%, but that has also been the 20-year average that we've seen across the economy. And that has taken into account the time that the Labor Party were in government and, of course, the time that the Coalition have been in government. But the key point to driving wages growth is to get more people into jobs, because when you get more people into jobs, you create more competition in the labour market, and therefore you get higher wages growth. And our policies, whether it's our tax cuts, whether it's our incentives for investment, whether it's our JobMaker hiring credit, whether it's our support for apprentices, whether it's our bringing forward and new investments in infrastructure, water infrastructure, transport infrastructure, communications infrastructure. These are the policies that are designed to drive jobs right across the country. And we saw 178,000 jobs being created last month. And we've seen 80% of the 1.3 million Australians who either lost their jobs or working hours reduced to 0 now back at work. So, Mr Speaker, the key to driving up wages growth is creating more jobs, and that is what our policies are designed to do.
The member for Curtin.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General and Minister for Industrial Relations. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government is helping both employers and employees to work together to create more jobs and better agreements as part of our economic comeback from the COVID-19 recession?
The Minister for Industrial Relations has the call.
Thank the member for her question and for her interest in this area. And as the Treasurer just noted, more jobs and more competition for jobs is what drives wage growth. And one thing that members opposite very rarely like to acknowledge is that more people on enterprise agreements means higher wages. The whole purpose of Paul Keating's design of the enterprise agreement system was to move people off awards onto enterprise agreements where the wages are higher. And at the peak of the COVID recession, there were some 1.3 million Australians who'd either lost their job or were stood down on 0 hours. And the goals of this government are to create jobs. And everything in the bill that we put before this parliament this morning is designed to create jobs and put upward pressure on wages. And when we look at the enterprise agreement, the bargaining making system, there is absolutely universal agreement that it no longer works, that it's no longer fit for purpose. Employers agree with that proposition, employees agree with that proposition, the government agrees with that proposition. We all want to do something about that, except for members opposite. And in fact, it was Paul Keating himself who said that enterprise bargaining doesn't work as it should do, as I designed it to do. Now, that is preventing bargaining from increasing productivity and increasing wages. And in the last 10 years, we've seen enterprise agreements in free fall. They peaked at 25,150 in 2010, down to just 10,711 in 30th June this year. That's a 57% drop in people who are covered by enterprise agreements. And if you are covered by an enterprise agreement, your median hourly ordinary time earnings are 40% higher than if you are on the awards. More enterprise agreements, higher wages. More jobs, higher wages. It's a fairly simple calculus. And that's why we are actually making changes, bringing ideas to the table to try and fix the enterprise agreement making system. Simplify procedures, cut red tapes, and there are a number of improvements that we're making. And these improvements are meant to be and are designed to stop the sort of things happening that we've seen recently, where it becomes untenably difficult to actually conclude an agreement. In the Officeworks agreement in 2019, there was enormous time and effort having to be allocated to discussions around cool rooms for Officeworks. Undertakings had to be sought and provided by Officeworks that it would not require employees to, quote, engage in work that would entitle them to a cold work disability allowance within the meaning of Clause 28 of the General Retail Industry Award, or hold a liquor licence. And Officeworks had no want at all to have a cold room or hold a liquor licence. And these types of legalistic, technical accoutrements that have gone around the system mean that it doesn't work and it can be improved.
The Minister's time has concluded. The member for Cooper has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Under the government's legislation, a personal carer in aged care could lose up to $11,000 a year from their take-home pay. Why is the government's Christmas gift for frontline workers a cut to their take-home pay?
The Minister for Industrial Relations has the call.
The reason why not one of the questions that have been asked today seeks to explain how it is they say that take-home pay would be as they say is because it's not true. And there is no explanation of that. There is absolutely nothing in the bill that anyone here can point to that does what they say it does, because it doesn't do that.
The member for Griffith has continually interjected. I've made my position as clear as I can. There's no point in me raising my voice like people do when they're interjecting. She will leave under 94A. And if members on both sides, I ejected a couple from the government side yesterday, if members are going to continue to ignore my rulings and the level of interjections, I will have no hesitation in naming a member and seeking to have them suspended for 24 hours. No hesitation at all. The Minister's concluded his answer. The member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for Housing and Assistant Treasurer. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government's home builder plan is supporting new jobs in the housing construction sector and helping to drive our economic comeback from the COVID-19 recession?
The Minister for Housing and Assistant Treasurer.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the member for Robertson for her question. She is unquestionably a champion for all of the workers in the residential construction industry in her electorate, and of course, like everybody in the Morrison government, is a champion for first home buyers. And I'm very happy to report to the member for Robertson that yes, the Home Builder program has been extraordinarily successful in supporting the 1 million jobs in the residential construction industry. Now, Power Housing Australia and CoreLogic have provided some very interesting statistics that show for every new home that's built in this country, 43 trades are supported, whether that's the bricklayers, whether that's the plumbers, whether that's the carpenters, and it extends all the way to the timber mill workers who make the frames and the trusses, the manufacturing workers who make the bricks and the tiles and the glass. They are Australian jobs. Now, the Home Builder program has had over 32,000 applications to date, and what that means, as the ABS has shown with building approvals data, that the Home Builder program has not just ensured that the residential construction industry got back to pre-pandemic levels, which was really its objective, it is now ensuring that new home sales are at a 20-year high. A 20-year high. And what do those new home sales mean? It means supporting those million jobs. In addition to that, Mr Speaker, with the First Home Loan Deposit Scheme working in conjunction with Home Builder, we have seen first home buyers at a 10-year high. In the middle of a pandemic, first home buyers are now at a 10-year high, and the Morrison government is a government for first home buyers, there's no doubt. Sadly, the opposition's abandoned first home buyers, abandoned those in the residential construction industry, don't support the Home Builder program, didn't originally support the First Home Loan Deposit Scheme. So there are literally tens of thousands of first home buyers in this country right now that know they have been able to get a foot into the market with the support of the Morrison government. And of course, the Home Builder program is fuelling our comeback. It is fuelling a tradie-led recovery in the economy, up to 1 million employees in the industry. It is 5% of our GDP, $100 billion. No one should underestimate how important the residential construction industry is, which is why, Mr Speaker, it's so disappointing that those opposite are so callous that they don't support the Home Builder program, they don't support this highly successful program. As the CEO of the Property Council recently said when we extended Home Builder, the government's decision to extend this successful program will keep hundreds of thousands of people in jobs. That is what the Morrison government is doing, and we will continue to do it throughout our comeback.
The minister's time has concluded. The member for Dobell.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm the government's new workplace laws allow the Fair Work Commission to approve agreements that cut existing penalty rates and leave workers worse off under Section 19?
The Minister has the call.
There's a provision that Labor put into the Fair Work Act.
Members on my left.
There's a provision that Labor put into the Fair Work Act which allows in out of the ordinary circumstances for changes and variations from awards. It's used very, very infrequently, and we have extended it to apply to COVID. The types of instances where it has been used previously, many of them relate to drought and flood, and they almost exclusively relate to changes in the number of hours worked and the span of hours. So again, your characterisation of the provision that we have used to extend a provision that you instituted in the Act is actually wrong.
The member for Wentworth.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Industry, Science and Technology. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government is backing our world-class science agency, the CSIRO, to continue its vital work in building climate and disaster resilience?
The Minister for Industry, Science and Technology.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. Science and research is all about solving problems and advancing humanity, and that means, of course, supporting the environment. Now, I know that the Minister for Emissions Reduction and the Minister for the Environment have a range of programs to build climate resilience within their portfolios. And as the Minister for Science, I'm focused on ensuring our science and research agencies are delivering the very practical outcomes that make a real and significant difference. Mr Speaker, the CSIRO has been building climate resilience for decades now, and they are achieving some amazing outcomes for breeding things such as drought-tolerant and water-efficient crop varieties. And importantly, their Future Feeds project is a potential game-changer when it comes to reducing emissions around the world. Mr Speaker, if cattle were a country, they would be the world's third largest emitter, behind China and the United States. The CSIRO has developed a specific type of seaweed to be used as a feed supplement for stock, and that supplement reduces methane emissions by more than 80%. Now, if just 10% of the livestock industry started using the Future Feed supplement, it would have the same positive climate effect as removing 100 million cars from the road. Now, the Future Feed supplement also increases productivity in cattle and sheep by around about 10% by providing a boost to our farmers' bottom line. So, Mr Speaker, it's great for the environment and it's great for business. Now, as an added bonus, growing seaweed for feed helps remediate waste nutrients and it reverses the growing levels of excess CO2 in our oceans. So, Mr Speaker, this is very practical work, and I'm delighted that this work has now been commercialised with investors coming on board to take this product to market. So this is a perfect example of how we adapt and we build climate resilience without having to shut down industries. And in fact, CSIRO's work is helping us to open new industries. For example, hydrogen, where they've come up with a metal membrane that is going to be able to extract pure hydrogen from ammonia, and that paves the way for a new clean energy export market. So, Mr Speaker, building resilience to reduce the impact of drought, flood, fire and a changing climate is vital. It's vital for the well-being of our communities and it's vital for our economy.
The Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Speaker. My question to the Prime Minister. In 3 months, JobKeeper will be ripped away and JobSeeker will be cut to $40 a day. Now the Prime Minister wants to also cut the take-home pay of working families. Don't the Prime Minister's cuts to JobKeeper, his cuts to JobSeeker and his cuts to take-home pay punish working families who have already had the toughest of years?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, once again, in relation to the issues of pay, the member opposite is just not telling the truth. Mr Speaker, in relation to JobSeeker and JobKeeper, we can say that post-September we saw 450,000 businesses, Mr Speaker, 450,000 employing more than 2 million Australians graduate from JobKeeper, and at the same time, Mr Speaker, we saw the number in net terms of people on JobSeeker decline. So, Mr Speaker, as we continue to gear the economy back up through this comeback that is underway, the plan that we have set out, Mr Speaker, is ensuring that our economy is getting stronger and stronger, and those in jobs are no longer needing the income support from the taxpayer that they needed before. I take the interjection from the former Assistant Minister, I should say the Shadow Assistant Minister, Mr Speaker, in the economic portfolios, who talked about unemployment. He would know, Mr Speaker, the effective rate of unemployment has almost halved, Mr Speaker. Indeed, it has halved since the peak of the crisis, from almost 15%, from 14.9% to 7.4%. Now, I would have thought that someone who claims to have great prowess in economics would understand what the effective rate of unemployment meant, Mr Speaker. But it doesn't suit his argument to know that we have seen 80% of jobs come back, Mr Speaker, jobs either lost or reduced to 0 hours. Now, Mr Speaker, this recovery has a long way to go, and there are still difficult issues that need to be solved. and we will engage constructively in delivering practical solutions which delivers a stronger economy, which means more jobs, which means better wages, Mr Speaker. That's what we have been delivering, and that's what we will continue to deliver. But the politics of division, the politics of conflict, which the Labor Party, Mr Speaker, feeds off in times of desperation most significantly, I only wish to quote back at the Leader of the Opposition what he said. Back in July of 2019, people are tired of conflict that passes for politics these days. He said they want solutions to their challenges. This Leader of the Opposition has no solutions, Mr Speaker. He just has desperate false pleasures dressed up, Mr Speaker, as a way to ensure that he can protect himself.
The Prime Minister has concluded his answer. The member for Barker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Communications, Cyber Safety and the Arts. Will the Minister please update the House on what the Morrison government is doing to ensure Australians stay connected, particularly during the upcoming disaster season?
The Minister for Communications, Cyber Safety and the Arts.
Well, I do thank the member for Barker, who's a very strong advocate for the importance of regional communications, and his question that he's asked today goes to the critical importance of communications in bushfires and other natural disasters, to coordinate emergency response, to call for help, to get reliable information and advice, to let friends and family know you're okay. These are all the reasons and many more why communications is critical, and that's why we've moved quickly to learn and to act on the lessons of last year's bushfires when it comes to maintaining connectivity. We announced the $37.1 million Strengthening Telecommunications Against Natural Disasters package, and under that package 467 base stations will receive extra battery backup to ensure that they keep going, keep providing mobile coverage for at least 12 hours, even when there is a loss of mains power, because we know from what happened in the bushfires last year that overwhelmingly it's the loss of mains power, not direct fire damage, which causes mobile coverage to go out. And in the member's own electorate, base stations at Minderi, at Mundalla West and in Winarka will all be having extended battery backup for at least 12 hours of operation. We've committed $10 million for temporary telecommunications infrastructure, cells on wheels or cows, a little different to the cows the Minister for Industry, Science and Technology was speaking about, satellite-connected cells on wheels or SAT cows. These are devices that can be rolled into areas that have lost connectivity, and immediately there is mobile connectivity. So important. 12 NBN portable satellite kits, 5 satellite-equipped roadmuster trucks. I saw this morning at Namadgi National Park, one of these new trucks demonstrated they worked well on the south coast of New South Wales last year, in Bateman's Bay and in other locations. The truck arrives and all of a sudden, even if the terrestrial network is down, even if there's no power, you can get connectivity with your smartphone, you can get Wi-Fi connectivity, so important. $7 million for satellite connectivity to rural fire service depots and evacuation centres around the country. Almost 100 connected before the end of this year, in total 2,000 to be connected. So, Mr Speaker, our comeback from the pandemic, from the recession, is about a stronger, safer, more secure Australia, and nothing could be more important in keeping Australians safe than better connectivity in emergencies as we keep Australians safe.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. On Monday in this House, the Prime Minister refused to guarantee that no worker would be worse off under his new workplace laws. Why didn't the Prime Minister just tell the truth and admit he was already planning a cut to take-home pay?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, it just simply wasn't true. That's why, Mr Speaker. That wasn't true, Mr Speaker. You know, Mr Speaker, I get it. I get it that the Leader of the Opposition is under a lot of pressure. Mr Speaker, I get it that he's becoming more desperate by the day. And this week, Mr Speaker, has just underlined that, Mr Speaker. What he has suggested is untrue.
Resume his seat. Members on my left. The Did the Leader of the Opposition have a point of order? And has the Prime Minister concluded? And we'll go to the next question. The member for Lyne has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Agriculture, Drought and Emergency Management. Will the Minister outline to the House how the McCormack-Morrison government has given Australians the support they need to manage through and recover from natural disasters such as droughts, floods and fires?
The Minister for Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I thank the member for Lyon for his question and obviously acknowledge the fact that his electorate had that intersection on the drought but also fire, and I thank him for his support and acknowledge the work that all members have done. But let me say that while quite rightly there has been considerable attention on COVID-19 and our response to COVID-19, this government has never lost focus on those lives that were impacted not just by a drought that's been going on for some 8 years, the bushfires of this summer, and also the floods in northwest Queensland, where nearly 500,000 head were lost in a matter of 24, 48 hours. And that's why we'll continue to make sure that those programs that we as a government have rolled out and continue to roll out make a difference, whether it be the drought. Over $10 billion has been committed in supporting those farmers get through the drought, get back up to agriculture, being able to increase their production from $60 billion to $65 billion. And that was through $310 million just in direct payments to let them put bread and butter on their table
The
every
member for
fortnight.
McNamara will leave
It was
under
also
94,
with respect to the $4 billion that was set aside through the Regional Investment Corporation to allow farmers to refinance up to $2 million of their debt from banks into the Regional Investment Corporation with no interest, no repayments for 2 years. That was saving them up to $120,000 a year, taking it out of the big banks' pockets and putting it back in farmers' pockets. It was also about the Future Fund, the Drought Future Fund, which is now drawn down, the $5 billion Future Fund, and the first dividend of $100 million will be paid out before the end of June, and we will continue to look for the next year as we stand here today. Whether it's the partnership we took also with respect to the northwest Queensland floods with the Queensland Government, and I acknowledge them and the support that they gave those people there in partnership with us. It was $100 million in direct support payments to those people that were impacted by those floods, and over $300 million in terms of restocking and replanting grants to allow farmers to get a cash flow straight away. And then with the bushfires, over $2 billion has been committed. And before we even started that $2 billion, there was $250 million directly put out in support payments to give dignity and respect to those victims. But now we continue to roll out that $1.2 billion with the last major tranche of that, $450 million going towards local economic recovery plans, letting the locals decide how they diversify their economic base and rebuild a more resilient community. But the biggest investment we've made across all those disasters is the nearly $130 million in mental health support. It's not just trying to rebuild communities, but we are rebuilding lives. And while we take up the Royal Commission's recommendation of creating a single national recovery agency, let me make it clear to all those Australians that were impacted. Our principles won't change. We'll continue to support every Australian through their hour of need, no matter what.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and I move that so much of the standing orders be suspended as would prevent the Leader of the Opposition from moving the following motion immediately. That the House 1 notes that A. On Monday the Prime Minister refused to guarantee that no worker would be worse off because of his industrial relations changes. B. Today the government has introduced legislation which leaves workers worse off. C. At a time when wages are already at record lows, the Prime Minister's changes will mean workers' take-home pay will be cut. D. While claiming the economy is going so well that JobKeeper and JobSeeker can be cut, the Prime Minister is using the pandemic as cover to cut take-home pay. E. It's not just businesses who've had a difficult year, workers have too. F. Nurses, supermarket workers, cleaners, childcare workers, teachers, truck drivers, aged care workers and all the frontline workers in Australia who have kept the nation running during this pandemic are being given a Christmas gift of a pay cut by this Prime Minister. And G, this is not the first time this government has attacked take-home pay, and 2, therefore condemns the Prime Minister for using the pandemic to cut the take-home pay of Australian workers. Mr Speaker, the fact is that the heroes of the pandemic deserve better than this Scrooge of a Prime Minister.
The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. The Leader of the House
I move
has the
that the member
call.
no longer be heard.
The Leader of the House has moved. The Leader of the Opposition be no further heard. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Division required. Ring the bells for 4 minutes.
You're silly.
Keep it clean, Shazza. Don't go to the gutter. Swear, Jar.
Right, whatever Lydia wants. They did good work with that. Right. That's good.
I'm still not sure it's appropriate for me to.
Lock the doors. The question is the Leader of the Opposition be no further heard. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair, the noes to the left, and I appoint the honourable members for Nichols and Gray tell us for the ayes, and the honourable members for Werriwa and MacArthur tell us for the noes. Order. The result of the division is ayes 63, noes 53. The question is therefore resolved in the affirmative. Is the motion seconded? The Manager of Opposition Business.
Speaker, seconded. This bill is a pay cut for frontline workers in black and white.
The Manager of Opposition Business.
The heroes of the pandemic,
the Leader
and
of the
this
House
is
has
what
the
no longer
call.
be heard.
The Leader of the House has moved that the Manager of Opposition Business be no further heard. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. If the ayes have it, division required to ring the bells for 1 minute. Members, they must remain in their seats during this successive division unless they're changing their vote or did not vote in the previous division, in which case they must report to the tellers. Lock the doors. I appoint the same tellers as the previous division. Again, I remind members they must remain in their seats unless they're changing their votes or did not vote in the last division, in which case they must report to the tellers. Order. The result of the division is ayes 63, noes 53. The question is therefore resolved in the affirmative. The question now is that the motion be disagreed to. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
This Prime Minister is cutting your pay.
Leader of the House.
I move that the question be put.
The Leader of the House has moved that the question be put. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Division required. Ring the bells for 1 minute.
Well, he's always good or bad at the old debate that we had.
Lock the doors. I appoint the same tellers as the previous division. Again, members must remain in their seats unless they're changing their vote or did not vote in the last division, in which case they need to report to the tellers. Order. The result of the division is ayes 63, noes 54. The question is therefore resolved in the affirmative. The question now is that the motion moved by the Leader of the Opposition be disagreed to. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Division required. Ring the bells for 1 minute. And again, members must remain in their seats unless they're changing their vote or did not vote in the previous division, in which case they need to report to the tellers. Lock the doors. I appoint the same tellers as the previous division. Members must remain in their seats unless they're changing their vote or did not vote in the previous division, in which case they must report to the tellers. Order. The result of the division is ayes 65, noes 52. The question is therefore resolved in the affirmative, and we're back to question time, and the member for North Sydney is seeking the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the Environment. Will the Minister outline to the House the important measures the Morrison government is taking to protect our unique and precious wildlife?
The Minister for the Environment.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for North Sydney for his question and commend him for his interest in the environment of Sydney and the greater metropolitan area. Mr Speaker, Australia is home to more species than any other developed country, and our wildlife is found nowhere else in the world. Of the more than 1,900 listed threatened species, 99.9% have a recovery plan or conservation advice in place. Since coming to government, we've invested more than $505 million towards supporting outcomes for threatened species and ecological communities. This includes our Regional Land Partnerships Program, the Environment Restoration Fund, the Communities Environment Program and the Wildlife and Habitat Bushfire Recovery Fund. Our $200 million investment post-bushfires is already delivering practical actions to help our threatened species and help our habitat recover. And an example of how that money is actually delivering real outcomes, more than 1 million hectares of pest animal control has occurred, an area more than 4 times the size of the ACT. This is giving species like the brush-tailed rock wallaby and the critically endangered northern corroboree frog the best chance of recovery. And good news yesterday from Kangaroo Island is that the first little pygmy possum survivor was found in remnant bushland, and I want to thank Kangaroo Island Land for Wildlife and all our wonderful conservation volunteers that we've been able to support through bushfire recovery funding. As the House knows, I recently announced a very popular koala package focusing on habitat restoration and the very
Member for Macarthur will leave under Standing Order 94A.
National Koala Census. Well received. Our National Environmental Science Program has a major focus on applied science turning that academic work into real-world activities on the ground that make a difference. We're supporting the black cockatoo in Western Australia, the dunnet on Kangaroo Island, the eastern quoll on Bruny Island and many more through our Safe Havens network, building feral, predator-free areas where we can introduce our threatened species and watch them thrive. Those safe haven projects on Flinders Island and French Island in Victoria, and we're looking to add more through a competitive grants round that's currently open for application. Mr Speaker, our approach, the Morrison government's approach, is that we listen to the experts. We take positive and proactive action on the ground. We make a difference with our conservation volunteers and with the work that we do in our unique and iconic landscapes across Australia.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister, and I refer to his previous answers where he has suggested that the changes he's proposing in this bill to the Better Off Overall test under Section 19 will not result in any pay cut for workers. If that is the case, will he now guarantee that no worker will be worse off as a result of this legislation?
The Minister for Industrial Relations.
Mr Speaker, that section doesn't change the Better Off Overall test. What you do find, Mr Speaker, however, is that there is an inverse relationship between leadership tensions and truth in questioning on the other side. The higher the leadership tensions go, the less plausible, the more grasping, the less true the questions become. But what is really interesting is that we as a government are focused on better outcomes, they're focused on bigger outrage. And what really gets interesting is when you can't even rally the outrage properly. You can't even manage a fear campaign at the moment. Your leadership is so weak.
The member for Lindsay has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Will the Minister please outline to the House how the Morrison government is supporting Indigenous employment, including in my electorate of Lindsay?
The Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Lindsay for her ongoing interest in the work that she's doing within her electorate. We're continuing to build on our current strategies for increasing the employment of Indigenous Australians across the spectrums of industry. But in the seat of Lindsay, on the 18th, the Minister for Employment and I, through the Greater Sydney Virtual Jobs Fair, spoke to young people about the impact of online use during COVID. The 174 attendees of the day had the opportunity to engage with employer groups and to listen to opportunities that they could aspire to within the Australian workforce. And there are 624 jobs on offer. We then had the opening of the New South Wales Indigenous Business and Employment Hub. In addition to that, I had a good meeting with the Chief Minister for the Northern Territory, in which we talked about job opportunities for people in Northern Australia in the sense of gaining better skills, employment opportunities, but wealth creation. Because it is through that job cycle that we create the opportunities for young people and older people to move out of the reliance on welfare. In addition to that, I had a discussion with Jennifer Westacott about the possibility of training Indigenous young people to become board members on ASX companies, because that gives role models that shows that there is a future that will give them the chance to be part of Australian industry and to walk with some of the giants across all spectrums of the workforce that prevails and across industry. In addition to that, Leila Smith, CEO of Aora, spoke to me about the possibility of internships in this place. What she suggested was that it would be good for members of this chamber and the other chamber to take on Indigenous internship people who wanted to come in here and experience what it's like to work with a Member of Parliament, but to acquire the skills and knowledge of how this place works. The student I had, the internship student I had is now going to Columbia and will study on a scholarship in the United States. It opens many doors for her in a way that was never there before. She lacked confidence. Through this program, we're now seeing her excel. So I'll be looking at all of the opportunities to take our children into the 15 top payroll jobs that exist in this nation. That's where they will succeed. That's where they will be least expected to succeed. So I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister.
Speaker, on that very positive note, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
The Prime Minister, the Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, documents are tabled in accordance with the list circulated to honourable members earlier today. Full details of the documents will be recorded in